Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and we are back with another full build video. And this one's going to be somewhat unique, even amongst a lot of the stuff that I've already done on this channel, and that's because this kit is fully 3D printed. And it's a commission build. The client reached out to me asking if I could build this for him. Now this is the Freelancer Max in 1/200 scale. It is from the video game Star Citizen, and is one of the player's controllable ships in the game. It's from a company called JRDF, and a company based out of the UK. I've never heard of them before, but they specialize in kind of science fiction type, one-off vessels. Now this is a limited edition, and as you can see opening the kit, it does come with quite a lot of stuff. You get magnets, and I'll tell you what those are used for later on. You get a acrylic laser cut stand to pose the aircraft in flight, as well as all the various parts, and it is all packaged in what I can only describe as an extremely satisfying and very nice packaging system with laser cut foam to, help protect all of the somewhat delicate parts in this kit. And so definitely the kit, it definitely feels professional. And obviously it's something different from your typical Tamiya kits or Revell kits or whatever, where everything just kind of comes in bags, and this is definitely different and unique in that it is 3D printed, and it just presents a different set of building challenges. So getting all the parts out here, you can see that the parts all come on these, these structures, these frames, and that's used to, they're called supports, and that's used to help the printing process in order to ensure that all of the detail is printed correctly. Now, I want to preface this video by saying that I think that this type of kit is kind of the future of scale modeling. Still has a ways to go, and I'll point out a couple of areas where I think you'll agree with me where it's still somewhat lacking, but we are seeing more and more 3D printed stuff in scale modeling, mainly in the aftermarket area, but I think 3D printing will become much more mainstream in the major manufacturers and eventually kind of start replacing the whole injection molding process. So here I am removing all the parts from the supports, and I was a little concerned at first because there's a lot of supports on these parts that it was going to be a really tedious, difficult process of having to literally clip each one of these little supports. But thankfully, they all come off quite easily, and the parts were very easy to remove and very easy to clean up. There was very little cleanup spots left on them. You can see all the little parts. I'm going to leave these attached for now as I get through some of the bigger parts first, but cleanup was a breeze, and it was very quickly that I was able to get start painting. So I went ahead and primed the interior parts black, and we're going to start doing some painting. Now, the client supplied a lot of good reference images, and I found some others as well online. So we're going to start off with the cargo bay here, laying down a layer of steel. The reference images showed the cargo bay as being very metallic and multiple different shades of metallic. So we're going to start with the steel color first, and then we'll come back and hit some different details in there. But you do get you see that the very back bulkhead there's these lines kind of going almost horizontally across the detail. That's one of the drawbacks of 3D printing at this point in time, is you still get layer lines, especially depending on the way they had to orient the parts to get them printed correctly. You could get some weird interactions with the detail and the layer lines. So unfortunately, a little bit of that still shows up even in this kit. But fortunately, they was usually limited to the interior detail stuff and not very much on the exterior. So again, that is kind of nice. Here you can see we're doing the base layer color for the cockpit, going for like a off-white ivory color here. Again, just going off of reference pictures. You'll often see me like pausing while I'm painting, and that's because I'm usually checking my reference pictures. Sometimes though, it could also be because something funny just happened on the show that I'm watching while I do this. So just be aware. It could be one of those two options, and honestly, I couldn't tell you at this point which one it was. But another fun thing about this kit that really kind of drew me to it in terms of not just like the challenge of doing a fully 3D printed kit, not only the challenge of doing a spaceship, but it really allowed me to do a lot of hand painting that I haven't done in a long time. This really kind of took me back to my old wargaming days where I was painting wargaming miniatures. So it was kind of a fun little bit of a nostalgic trip for me. So because I had to do a lot of hand painting on here. I just think that doing any kind of masking at this scale would have just been more time consuming than it would have been worth than it is just to, hand paint these details here. And unfortunately, another drawback of the kit that you'll see a little bit later on are the clear parts. They are 3D printed as well using clear resin. But unfortunately, the clarity just was not all of that great. So you really won't be able to see a lot of this detail in the end. But if there's one thing you've learned from watching my stuff, that usually doesn't stop me from painting and doing detail, even though you can't see it later on. I still enjoy the process. And it was fun little exercise here to paint this cockpit up using colors that I wouldn't normally use, things like that. So I still enjoyed the process, even full well knowing that I wouldn't be able to see it in the end, or at least not see it well. I did try a few things to help mitigate the opaqueness of the clear parts, and I to varying degrees. So you will see that later on in the video. Moving back to the cargo area. So now we're just using some different types of metallic paints here to pick out different areas of the cargo ship or the cargo area to just create more detail and pick out some of those highlights and stuff. And there you can really see those layer lines on that back wall. Again, unfortunate, but I think as the 3D printing technology continues to advance, because it is advancing very quickly. I mean, even in just the span of a few short years, I'm surprised how quickly it has changed and become better. So I definitely think things like this will be much more feasible in the future for more mainstream kit manufacturers. But in the end, I still think it's pretty good for what we've got here. So just doing a little bit of hand painting here. The kit comes with only a very small handful of decals, and they're meant for the exterior of the vehicle. So unfortunately, the reference picture showed a lot of placards and stenciling inside the cargo bay. So I tried to do as best I could, just freehanding it. And I mean, in the end, I think it turned out all right, especially at 1/200th scale. So now with the interior parts painted, I can go ahead and start assembling things. And I think you'll all be drawn to my lovely pink Band-Aid there. That's what happens when your 6-year-old is in charge of picking out the Band-Aids and you cut your finger. You get pink rainbows. So anyways, don't be jealous. It's all right. So we're going to go ahead and get everything all assembled. Now, because this is resin, you do have to use cyanoacrylate glues, CA glues, or super glues. You can't use your typical like Tamiya extra thin cement, just won't work. So just be aware. But trying to get the cockpit in, obviously you can see here's a little bit of a struggle. It took me a few tries, but then I finally figured out just the right combination of, twisting and getting it aligned in there that I was able to finally get it in there. And I mean, the 3D printing process is nice because you do get like these nice solid one-piece hull pieces that you don't have to sand seam lines. In fact, there was no sanding on this kit whatsoever, which is a huge change of pace for some of the stuff that I do. But it also means that there are just new challenges like trying to get this cockpit piece inside and fit. So I mentioned earlier that the kit comes with magnets. Well, that's because you are given magnetized options for like your landing gear and the boarding ramp. So if the kit provides you with both extended and closed landing gear so that you can pose the vehicle in flight or landed on the ground. You can pose the crew entry door open or closed. You can pose the main cargo door open or close. In fact, the way that it's designed is you can separate the two fronts of the fuselage, like the front part of the fuselage from the back part, to expose the entire cargo bay area, and it's kind of like this slide fit, press fit type deal. It's really ingenious, and if you've watched my channel long enough, you'll know that I'm a big fan of options. And when you can do options like this, where you can easily swap parts out just using a couple of magnets, that really tickles my fancy, and I like that type of thing. So there were a few parts that do need to be assembled. What I need to point out, and I'm sorry for not pointing this out at the beginning, this kit has a really low part count. I mean, with less than 50 parts altogether, and that's amazing that you can get so much detail out of a kit like this. I mean, we get full interior, full cargo bay type of thing, multiple options with such a low part count. I like that idea, and I like that notion. So here, just cleaning up the two gun turrets that sit on the side of the fuselage. It's interesting that they're keyed together so that when you can put them in and glue them together, they can still rotate freely together, in unison. Kind of a neat design, in my opinion. So here we're just getting the guns on, and now we can attach the front fuselage half to the front half of the back fuselage, and it'll all make sense later on, I promise. But again, we're just using our CA glue to get things attached, and for the most part, the kit had pretty good, solid attachment points. There were only a few places where it was a little iffy, but in the end, I got what we needed to do, so we can get that attached. Get a couple more parts, detailed parts here for the engine nacelles, and get these installed in there. They just sit in these recesses. Now, I mentioned before that the clear parts are a bit of a trouble, and one of the things I ran into with the clear parts is I actually broke the main canopy window while I was trying to remove it from the supports. And I tried reaching out to the manufacturer to see if I could get a replacement. I never ended up hearing back from them. And I tried a couple of different of their emails, so I kind of had to make do with what I had. And one of the ways that I tried to mitigate the opaqueness of the clear parts was using some UV curing clear resin. And so I brushed this on, and what's nice about the UV curing resin is that it's really good at self-leveling. And so my thinking was I would use it to help level out some of those print layer lines in the clear part, and it did it helped a little bit. I would say it probably added about 20% more clarity to the clear part, and as opposed to like trying to sand and polish it, which I tested on this upper part of the window, and it didn't really work out very well. So that is an option if you ever build this kit or a kit like it and you're dealing with clear 3D printed parts that have an opaqueness because of the layer lines. Using a little bit of just UV curing resin just on its own can help mitigate that just a little bit. So here we're going to get the upper canopy portion installed, and then we'll get the main canopy installed. And again, because I broke it, I had to do this in two parts, and I tried my best to disguise and clean up the actual break as best I could. In the end, you can still see it, but it's not super noticeable. It doesn't really stand out. So I think I made the best with what I had, because, like I said, I never heard back from the company to get a replacement part. It would have been nice, but I get it. They're probably busy or something. So anyways, we can get the main canopy installed here, get that put in, and in the end, it looks all right. I mean, you can kind of see into it a little bit, but like I said, it's not the clearest. So one of the things that I decided early on, before even starting the painting process here, is that I was going to mask off the clear parts with this liquid mask instead of trying to actually cut masks for them. And the reason why I chose to do that was because I didn't want to give myself any opportunity to break the clear parts further. They were quite fragile, and I was afraid that like laying tape down there and trying to cut it with a knife, it was just going to cause too much stress on the clear parts. And so I figured I would just hand paint all of the canopy frames at the end of the project. So I unfortunately ended up losing a little bit of footage here, mainly just the priming and masking portion. So I ended up priming the whole thing white because a large portion of the spacecraft is white. And then I had to spend 3 or 4 evenings carefully masking off a lot of parts here. And I'm really sad that I missed out on that footage because I do a second round of masking later on that I didn't record because I had originally recorded the first part of the masking. And so anyways, I apologize that you are missing out on a couple of important steps that I haven't really shown very well in a lot of my other videos about masking, especially complex things like this spacecraft is. But nevertheless, we're just going to have to move on. Now, the paint that I'm using is this like fire orange paint. And at first it goes on, it has a very yellowish look to it. But as you build up the layers, the orange really starts coming through. So I really liked this color. And it was a good color that matched the reference pictures that I was given. So really kind of happy with how it turned out. Even though at first I was a little like, wait, I thought I got orange. This is looking yellow. But once you start layering it on, I mean, it's going on quite thin. But once you start building up the layers, that nice like fiery orange does start popping out there. So again, quite happy with it, and I'm using colors here that I wouldn't necessarily normally use in a lot of my military model making. So this overall, this was just a fun change of pace. Additionally, the client didn't want any weathering on this with it, which is something that I tend to not do. I like my weathering. But the client wanted a very specific look for it, and that's great. Like, I am more than happy to satisfy what the client is after, as well as challenge myself to do things that are, maybe outside of my comfort zone or just, not part of my norm. So here we've done the second round of masking. So we've masked off some part of the orange parts, and now we're painting this dark gray color. And I really love the combination of the white, the dark gray, and the orange. It just works really well, and it definitely like pleases the aesthetic, the modern futuristic aesthetic that I like personally. So this was a lot of fun to paint, even though it was very time consuming and meticulous to do all the masking on this. Totally worth it in the end, and really pleased with how it all turned out. Again, you can see here just how much masking I've had to do, even just to paint a few little parts. And then there's even more that I'll have to paint later on, hand by hand, because there's just going to be too much of a pain to do with masking. So I've removed all the masking tape here, and you can see that I'm going to start doing some hand painting here of details. There's various little details around the vehicle that required attention. And it's fun because it just helps to like break up all the big blocks of color and really provide a great sense of scale. I mean, at 1/200 scale, it's kind of hard to imagine what this would be like. But when you start seeing things like the doors and the windows and, these little things, which I imagine are like reaction thrusters or something. I don't know. I don't play Star Citizen, so I'm not very familiar with the, the science in the game. But in my mind, I imagine that's what they are. And again, just a lot of fun doing a lot of these little details, going for more of a science fiction aesthetic versus like a dirty military aesthetic. It was great. The another thing that the client requested as part of the aesthetic of the game was to try and match, I don't want to say like the cartoonish nature of the game, because the game is definitely not cartoonish, but it is a video game, right? And he asked me to replicate the overall look of a video game vehicle, as opposed to like trying to paint a video game vehicle realistically. And so that was again another challenge that I was like, okay, that sounds like fun, sounds interesting. And so what you'll see a little bit later on is really going heavy with a very high contrast panel wash. And you, if you've followed me long enough, you'll know that I like a panel wash. I like the aesthetic of a panel wash on a model, but even this is pushing like what I would personally choose as an aesthetic for the panel wash. But in the context of what the client requested, it totally works, and I think it looks great. So here we're just getting more details painted on the engine nacelles. A lot of great little like greeblies on there, and as far as I know, I mean, the 3D model for this was built largely from the actual 3D assets from the game, so it should be fairly fairly faithful to the actual in-game vehicle, which is always something that I would imagine like fans of the game would appreciate. So here we're just doing a little bit more detail painting with the orange, hitting some of these like pinstripe type things. But now we're going to move on to the engines. So you are provided the engines as all one solid piece, but they do have some varying levels of metallic color to them. So I started out with an aluminum color, just got the whole thing painted in aluminum, and just laying it on there really, really lightly over the white base. So it's kind of, and I apologize that the white balance on my video is a little off, but here we have my little desk fan. Really helps for speeding up the drying process here. But now we're going to go ahead and hit things with some steel color. Now you'll see I've masked off the kind of circular band around the mid part of the engine. That was meant to be very shiny, but I wanted to kind of bring down the shine on the rest of the engine and just add a little bit of like shading to the engine. So we're just using a steel color now over the aluminum, and this is just going to help us to create a little bit of tonal variation in the overall body of the engine, or the engine exhaust, I guess is what you would call them. And these were fun to paint. And again, because the client didn't want to necessarily go like, he wasn't really like looking for a weathered look, I still wanted to add a little bit of just like, show that these engines had been used without necessarily going like super dark and sooty and stained and, color, because you could do some fun like Russian jet exhaust, like color modulation with like greens and blues and purples and stuff. But in the end, I'm happy with how they look. So with all the main painting done, we can move on to sealing all of our work in, throwing on a couple of decals, and then doing our panel wash. So we're going to use my favorite here, the Alclad Aqua Gloss. And we're going to go ahead and give the whole thing just like a nice, good, solid coat of gloss. The client did request that the ship be glossy, so I won't be doing like a matte coat or even a satin coat and afterwards. We're going to keep it gloss. But again, it fits the aesthetic and it works for the subject. So we're just going to go ahead, give everything a nice, good, solid coat, and make sure that we're not missing anything. Make sure that, and the nice thing about the Aqua Gloss is it will kind of help fill in some of those micro imperfections that are artifacts of the 3D printing, and smooth things out just a little bit. It can't work miracles, but it helps a little bit. So we're just going ahead and giving everything a nice, good, solid coat over all the parts. I did make sure you'll see in the kind of the back left of the screen there that there's still the part that I have in tape. That's because that's where the back half of the fuselage slides onto the front half of the fuselage, and I wanted to keep that paint free so that it wouldn't hinder the sliding action of the two halves of the fuselage there. So just keep as a mental note in the background there. So with the gloss coat nice and cured, we can move on to doing our decals. Now the kit does supply you with just a number of number decals, so you can actually choose what number goes on to your vehicle. The client chose 003, and I think it looks great. So really, the actual decals themselves are actually somewhat distressed, which is interesting, so that you can kind of see that they have like little bits missing from it, kind of a thing. So, unique look. I like it. Unfortunately, the engine nacelles kind of hide the numbers, so you don't really see them very well in the end. But now we're going to move on to our panel wash. I mentioned before, the client wanted a very in-game representative of how the ships look. And so to replicate that, we're going with a black panel wash. And I don't use a black panel wash often, even though I do like using panel washes. Using a straight black panel wash oftentimes to me is just too much. And I know that might sound kind of funny coming from me, who does tend to do, go a little extreme on the panel washes. But like I said, I believe that it fits within the guidelines the client put out, as well as just like it works for the aesthetic of the ship and the video game. And I don't love the Tamiya panel liners. I find them to be a little aggressive, but it it worked out on this, and I'm quite pleased that I really didn't run into any issues with applying it or removing it. It went over the aqua gloss really nicely, and then using just a little bit of enamel thinner here, we're able to get all the excess removed. So I apply the enamel thinner on, and it takes a few seconds for it to kind of like reactivate the panel wash, but once it does, then it pretty much just wipes right away without any real fuss. So it's just a matter of going around, removing all the excess. I always start off with like a paper towel first to kind of hit the area, and then if there's any like particular areas that are either being stubborn or hard to reach with the paper towel, then I'll get in there with like a Q-tip and get those parts. But this really didn't give me any trouble, and again, because I had a good, nice, solid gloss coat on there, that also helped to make it easier to remove. So in the end, very happy with it. Love the aesthetic of this, and at this point now we can go ahead and start getting all the parts combined and assembled and work towards the finish here. So engines going in. These are just kind of a press fit. There's no real like locating pin here. Get the little wings on to the outboard portion of the engine nacelles. So these just, glue into that little recess there. And then here's a demonstration on how the magnets work. So here we have the extended landing gear. Just magnetizes in there, pop it out, and then we can do the retracted version, just like that. Pretty cool. So now here's how the two fuselage parts slide together. Now that is not being glued on. The client will be able to slide that off and remove it if he wishes to view the interior of the cargo bay at his leisure. So now we can get the engine nacelles put on. These are not designed to like move or rotate at all. So they are like keyed to go in a specific way. But I think that's the best way to do it because it helps maintain their alignment, especially if you have like the landing gear down. You want it sitting on all of its landing gear nice and flat here. So there's the nose landing gear, and at this point I removed the liquid mask from the clear parts. We're gonna go ahead and get the frames painted up on here. Again, in the end, I just felt this was the best way to avoid damaging the clear parts any further, was just to hand paint it. Obviously, it's not going to be nearly as crisp and clean as if I had been able to mask it properly, but I think this was the safest option to maintain the integrity of the kit and to, make sure that I didn't waste the client's money here. So just a matter of going through, getting it all, taking your time. For your information, this footage is sped up about 500%. So I'm obviously taking this much slower in real time, but you don't want to watch it in real time. It would just take forever. So now we can get the gun turrets installed. Like I said, they're keyed so that they can actually rotate up and down in unison, which is pretty cool. And then finally we can do some of our last bit magnetizing options here. So we get the landing gear, boarding ladder there, and we can get the main cargo door installed on there. And there we go. We're ready to go. So for my first fully 3D printed kit, I'm quite pleased with how this turned out. And the client was more than happy. I was able to deliver it to him in person. He was a local, and it was very fun to watch him, ooh and ah over the model. And it's always just one of those things that makes you feel good when someone can admire your work. But again, it was fun, and it was very interesting to get a glimpse of what the future of scale modeling could be. Now, I don't know if we'll ever go to completely fully 3D printed kits for everything. I don't know that we can ever fully replace injection molded plastic. But I think there's definitely going to be a place in the future for much more mainstream, large scale 3D printing in scale modeling. And obviously we're seeing a little bit of that right now. Edward is producing 3D printed stuff. There are multiple other aftermarket companies that do 3D printed stuff. I know Magic Factory for their Corsair, they released a full 3D printed R2800 engine to do like an exposed engine diorama that is just absolutely stunning. I recommend you go look up the pictures of it because it is amazing, and it's literally all 3D printed in one as like one whole thing, and it's got ignition wires. I mean, it's got everything. So, this was a lot of fun, and I do own a 3D printer myself, and so I definitely plan on looking to see what's available out there in terms of what else what other subjects can I do 3D printed? I know science fiction is definitely an area that will benefit the most from 3D printing, at least early on, just because there aren't always as many, mainstream kits, plastic kits for science fiction type vehicles. So definitely going to be on the lookout for that, and we might see more of that on the channel in the future. Anyways, if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. To those that are subscribed, thank you so much for your subscription. Thank you for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. If you're not yet subscribed, consider subscribing and let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think about 3D printing in scale modeling, and what are your predictions for the future of scale modeling? I'd love to hear it. I'd love to have those discussions. I think it's a fascinating subject, and yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys have to think. Anyways, thank you, everyone. Huge shout out to my patrons. Greatly appreciate their support, helping to bring content like this to you. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, there's a link down in the description below. Check it out. And thank you again. We'll see you on the next video. Take care, everyone.